Hi guys, so now we're on step number two of process costing. So step number one was determining the units to account for. And so now that we have that in the bag, or we figured that part out, which it was 65,000 units, and we've separated into its their correct groups. So you have your beginning work in process, what you started and completed in the current period. And then lastly, your ending work in process, meaning the things that you started on in the current period. So for us, July, but we did not get to finish. It was like hands down, this is what we have left to complete. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. And now again, we're going to start on step two of the process. Okay. So here we are. Step two is to compute the equivalent units of production. So before we can go into that, let's talk about whole units versus equivalent units. So I like to think of whole units. It's the number of units in production during a period, whether completed or not. Now that's very important to understand because again, not all of the units that you touched was completed or started in that department was completed and started in that period. Okay, so now let's get into what equivalent units is. So equivalent units is a common matrix for fully assembled and partially assembled units. All right, so it is trying right now, how it stands is you're trying to compare apples, oranges, and bananas right now. That's how I like to see it, because you have some stuff that came in from beginning work in process. So you have some gallons of ice cream that was partially completed. You have some fully assembled or fully completed gallons of ice cream that you started and completed in the current period. And then you have some ending work in process. So you have some gallons that you started in the current period, but you didn't finish, right? So it has different levels of completion. So for a second, if I could go to my so for a second, if I can go to a whiteboard, this is the best way to illustrate it. So let's say, for example, that 1/4 represents what you're beginning with. Okay, so you're beginning with. Okay, and then you have some stuff that was completed in the current period, right? So let's say that's 5 5s. Okay, that represents 100% completed. So this is started and completed. Plus you have your ending work in process. Okay, so your ending work in process, and maybe this is going to be 3/8. Okay, so equivalent units is basically trying to get all of this on the same playing field. As I mentioned before, right now you have some apples, you have some oranges, and you have some bananas. And right now, maybe we're trying to make a smoothie or whatever the case may be. But if you took any of your math classes, in order to solve this particular problem, you need a common denominator. And that's what equivalent units is creating a common denominator for all of this partially completed work, right? Because again, we're all trying to assign some kind of cost to all of the units that you started in the beginning, completed, so forth and so on. Okay, so with that, I am going to go to the next slide. So give me a second. Okay. All right, I'm going to go back to my screen. All right, so here we are, equivalent units. So to continue with our example, so when we're looking at equivalent units, we're comparing the work done in each category. So for a second, go back to that video, or think back to that video where the guy was making ice cream, right? And so think about when direct materials such as the cream, the sugar, and all of that was added to the ice cream. And then think of conversion costs. Remember, conversion cost represents direct labor and factory overhead. So think about how that was all added in the system or in the making of the ice cream. All right. So work in process, beginning and ending, started and completed and transferred. We're all trying to, again, have a common denominator amongst all of that. And then lastly, I need to point out that percentage of completion, what they tell you, how much was completed is very, very important, okay? All right, so step 2, we're gonna first compute the equivalent units for production for just direct materials. We're gonna break it down. All right, so to compute the equivalent units for materials or direct materials, it is necessary to know how many materials were added during the manufacturing process. So for us, all materials are added at the beginning of the mixing process. So without the cream, the sugar, the whole milk, and all of that, we could not make the ice cream. So we're saying at the very beginning of this process, if this represents the mixing department, for instance, we're going to add all of the direct materials at the very beginning, okay? So we're going to add 100% of all of the direct materials. As soon as we start working on this gallon of ice cream, we're going to add in everything that we need, okay? All right, so this is where you should be right now. So now we're going to try to figure out, put everything on the same playing field, okay? All right, so again, we're gonna only focus on direct materials right now, and that's how we're gonna do it. All right, so step 1 of the process are in trying to figure it out. So it says, what percentage of materials was added in July just for work in process beginning? All right, so here I would say it's 0%. And the reason we say it's 0% is because remember, this 5,000 units or gallons of ice cream represent what came over from the prior period. Now remember, if we said that 100% of all direct materials is added at the beginning of the process, so here is my mixing department, and let's say this is the month of June. And then this is going to be the month of July. Same department, right? So if this came in, so they started working on 5,000 gallons, right? But they didn't finish all 5,000 gallons, right? Come on, okay. But when they first started working on these 5,000 gallons, we said that 100% of all of direct materials is added at the beginning of the process, which means that when it transferred over, when they didn't finish, but whenever at the end of the period they didn't finish, again, when we start working on these 5,000 gallons again in July, because all 5,000 was added in the prior period, there is nothing to add in July, okay? The only thing we're gonna be adding in July is conversion costs. So if 100% of the materials is added in a prior period, the only other thing left to add in July is only conversion costs, okay? So if you're still a little bit I'm not quite sure I get that, hang tight with me because we're gonna go into conversion costs and all of the other ones, and then it'll all make sense, okay? All right, so here I am going to say there's nothing to add. So I'm going to do 5,000 gallons times the 0% that we have to add in this period, and therefore it represents 0 direct materials. All right, so give me a second. I'm going to erase this. All right. So our next one we have is what we started and completed. So the next question again is asking what percentage of materials was added in July. Now for us, again, because we started and completed 57,000 gallons in the current period, if we started it and completed in this period, that means 100% of all of the direct materials was entered this period, right? So 100% times the 57,000 gallons that we have equals 57,000 direct materials, okay? All right, so then our next one is work in process ending, right? So again, work in process ending says that, hey, this is what I started in the current period, but I didn't finish. That is the definition of work in process, right? So if we started 3,000 but did not finish, remember the whole idea is 100% of all direct materials are added at the beginning of the period. So 100% times the 3,000 represents 3,000. Okay. All right, so then what is our total direct materials equivalent units? What we're going to do is now add that 57,000 plus 3,000, and we come up with, sorry, this should not be that. This should be 60,000 units. I need to make that change, okay? Everybody should be good to go. Now we're going to move on. All right, so step 2, we're going to compute the equivalent units for production conversion costs. So here I'm going to take a break and I'm going to start a new video on computing conversion costs. So yeah.